I'm Mikael Jorgensen. I play keyboards for the band Wilco.
Nels, Cline, guitarist, Wilco.
Kotche, I'm the drummer. Well, I joined the band in 2001, January, in Chicago, and I got into the band basically because of a producer we were working with at the time, Jim O'Rourke. So it was a very collaborative scene. There was a lot of cross-pollination between jazz and improvised music worlds and rock worlds and indie music. So it was very kind of, mixed up in a really cool way.
Yes, I moved to Chicago in 1998, and I helped build a recording studio called Soma with John McIntyre from the band Tortoise. And it was through John that I also met Jim O'Rourke, who then came to mix Yankee Hotel Foxtrot at the studio that I was working at, and that's 22 years ago. So.
Oh my God, it was the late 60s. Okay, so it was absolutely like Wonderland, psychedelic, creative. You know, radio was until underground. FM was one big playlist of every kind of pop music. And then I at age 10, I heard Ravi Shankar, Indian classical music became important, hippie culture became important. And later, when I was entering high school, John Coltrane and Miles Davis and so-called progressive rock became important to me. And that's the path I was on until I started playing with this man named Mike Watt from the Minutemen and Firehose and started playing rock and roll again. But it was Southern California was not known for improvising so much, but it was happening. And for pop music, it was incredible, but I was too young to go to all the big shows. But music's been my reason to live since I was 12 years old.
Yeah, I think each record has its own sort of process and guidelines that sometimes we're aware of and sometimes are a little less obvious. The most recent record, Cruel Country, was pretty collaborative in the performance of the material. A lot of it was recorded live. Some of the previous records were a little less immediate in that way, and they were kind of more like sculpting and creating the recordings, and so it kind of runs the gamut from being, sitting in a room together playing and recording, and then adding little flourishes to kind of constructing something almost from scratch in a way. So between those two extremes.
I would just add that, we typically don't work the same way twice. So whether it's going away to a different studio or doing a record more piecemeal where everyone comes in and adds their own parts separately, or whether we record it live in the same space, we kind of, switch through a lot of different paradigms like that.
In military speak, it means will comply. And as I understand it from Jeff, he thought this was a very funny name for a rock and roll band because rock and roll bands don't comply. So that's all I know. I don't know if it's true.
I also like that it has something to do with like transmission and receiving, like a radio metaphor where music is sort of sent out electronically through the airwaves. And before the internet, that was really how we experienced so much music. And I think it sort of, I don't know if it describes that exactly, but it sort of evokes that to me anyway. For the music listening experience, there's an absolute benefit, but there is a serious and substantial cost to all the musicians and artists who are now struggling to make a living, when before streaming, it was a much easier to make a decent middle class income playing music, but now it's extremely, extremely difficult. The lows are very low, and the huge artists are doing fine, but it's sort of like taken out the middle and just really, it's done a number on us.
I would say one advantage, though, is our first experience with it was when we released the Yankee Hotel Foxtrot record, because we had a tour booked and we were switching labels, so we were able to get the music into people, so they could hear it. So when they came to the shows, they would know some of the music ahead of time. So that was beneficial. And I think also now artists can, you can make a record and release it next week on, if you want to, on Bandcamp or SoundCloud or the other streaming services or whatever. So I think it's letting a lot more music be heard, because you're not at the whims of a record label and a production process necessarily. That's the benefit, but there is definitely the downsides to it as well. Yeah.
I agree with that.